Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I believe we have people from across the time zones tonight, and so or this morning, this afternoon, whatever it is for you. And so I'd like to thank you for spending some time with us. Hopefully, you're going to go away in a little while from here, knowing a little bit better what you're going to do for the essay questions, the essay problems on the CMA exam. This is something that I know is a big source of stress for a lot of candidates as they're preparing for the exam. There's a lot of uncertainty. And while on one hand, I understand that, on the other hand, I think that a lot of times candidates become too worried, become too stressed out about the essays and the problems. And it becomes more than it really needs to be for a lot of candidates as they're preparing. And a lot of it's a psychological process, and just in terms of knowing what to expect and feeling comfortable with all of that. And so what I want to do this morning is talk about the essays, the problems, what you can expect, and really how it is that you can go about preparing for them without making it an all-encompassing, all-consuming concern that you have that really kind of then detracts from your preparation, because ultimately what you're trying to do is you're trying to pass the exam, and we need to make certain that you have the skills, the knowledge, all of that you've been studying, to make certain that when you sit down to take your exam, you're going to pass it like you should, because you've prepared, you've done everything that you could do, you've done everything that you needed to do. And so it's kind of that mental psychological barrier that for a lot of candidates the essays are. So the issue that we have, and what it is that we're going to look at, and I'm going to talk for a little bit, and then we'll have some time for some questions at the end. If you have any, you can put them in the chat. I'll see them, not necessarily immediately when they come up, but I'll be able to see them over time or as we go through this. And so I'll talk, and then we'll have some time for questions. But let me go ahead and just, I don't have a lot of slides. If you've seen me speak, I often don't. But let me see if I can figure out here how to share my screen. And what we're talking about here, again, nothing new. We're talking about how to prepare to pass the essays, how to prepare for the essays on the CMA exam, and what it is that you need to do so that when you take your exam, you are going to not only pass the essays, but pass the whole exam as well. So the first thing that I want to start with just kind of is the question that we get most often probably about the essays is, what topic is going to be asked about the essays? What topics do I need to study for the essays? And so I want to start by looking at and talking about what the syllabus is for the essay questions, because everyone's trying to find, I don't want to say a shortcut, but you're trying to do a risk management process. And that if I know that this is the topic that's going to be on the essay, then I'll prepare for that and I'll be better able to manage that. So if we look at the syllabus of topics that is included on the essays, or could be included on the essays, it is the syllabus for the CMA exam. The same syllabus that they use to make the multiple choice questions from is the same syllabus they use to make the essay questions from. And so when the question is, what might be on the exam as an essay? If it's on the syllabus, it could be in an essay question. Just like if it's on the syllabus, it could be a multiple choice question. So you need to keep in mind and remember that the syllabus for the essay questions is exactly the same as the syllabus for the MCQs. They're not different. And so just when somebody says, you're reading a chapter in the book, a page, you're doing an MCQ, and the question is, could this be on the exam as an MCQ? Yes, it could. It could. It's in the syllabus. And so if that topic could be in the MCQs, it also could be in the essays and the problems. And this is a good thing. Okay, the fact that the syllabus for the MCQs is exactly the same as the syllabus for the essays is a very good thing. Okay, and we'll come back to this in just a minute here as to why that is. But the syllabus is the same. If it could be an MCQ, it might be an essay. If it might be an essay, it could be an MCQ. But there is a difference a little bit between the questions that can be asked. So let's look here talk for a moment about what types of questions might be asked in the essays. Well, again, it's getting back to the MCQs. Any question that is an MCQ could probably be made into an essay question. And most, but not all essay questions could be made into an MCQ. And so what I want to look at here is this. Let's take an example of ratio analysis. Okay, ratio analysis is a question, or is a topic that's going to be tested in the Part 2 exam as an MCQ. There are going to be MCQs about ratios. And based on the essay questions that they've released, it's also possible that ratios would be tested as an essay. So if they test ratios as an MCQ, what is the question that they're going to ask? Well, if you've studied ratios yet, you know they're going to give you a little bit of information, and they're going to ask you, what's the accounts receivable turnover? What's the quick ratio? What's the debt to equity ratio? Okay, there's some information, and then they ask you to calculate a specific ratio. Now, when they do this in the MCQ, it's very likely that they're going to give you more information than you need to answer that specific ratio. So if the question is about what is the current ratio, they may have some information about some long-term assets. They may have some information about, some sort of profit number or something like that. They're going to include information that you don't need to make certain you're able to sort through within that MCQ to determine what information you need to solve for that ratio and what information you don't need to solve for that ratio. If they ask ratios in an essay question, well, if they ask what is the current ratio, what is the quick ratio, what is the debt to equity ratio, what is the P ratio, whatever question they ask, whatever ratio they ask about in the essay question, it's calculated exactly the same way as it would be calculated in an MCQ. But what's different is in that essay question, what they might do is they might give you a lot of information, the whole balance sheet, part of the income statement, and then ask you to calculate 6 ratios from that information. Now, in an MCQ, there's normally a piece of information and you calculate 1 ratio. In the essay, there might be a bigger piece of information and they ask you to calculate 6 ratios. But we could take that essay question and break it down into 6 individual MCQs. So the ratios are calculated the same way, whether you're answering an MCQ or an essay. The numbers are used the same way, it's the same numerator, the same denominator, the same process to calculate the ratio. What they can do in an essay that they can't really do in an MCQ, it's much harder to do in an MCQ. What they can do in the essay question is ask you, why? Why does this matter? What does this mean? What does it tell us? So in the MCQs, you may get a number of individual MCQs that you have to calculate a ratio for. In an essay, you may get that same process of calculating a handful of ratios, but then there's going to be a question that says, what does this tell us about the company? What does this mean? What should the company look to improve in the future? What does it tell us this company doesn't do very well? And so in the essay questions, what I'm looking at here is this, what type of questions may be asked? Well, the types of questions that may be asked are the what does this mean question. Another example, capital budgeting. Calculate the net present value, calculate the internal rate of return. That's an MCQ. That can also be an essay question. But in the essay question, they can add something to the end of that capital budgeting question that says, what should the company do with these different proposals? Which proposals should be accepted? What would have to change in order for this project to be acceptable rather than not acceptable? What are those qualitative things that need to be taken into account when making the decision? So the essay questions can kind of go one step further than the MCQs by asking you to write a little bit about why this is important. What does this mean? Or another kind of more casual way, who cares? So you calculated all these ratios. Who cares? What do we do with it? What does it mean? What is management going to do as a result of this? But I come back again to this idea that the content that's tested in the essays is exactly the same content that's tested in an MCQ. If you get an MCQ about inventory and FIFO, LIFO, or you get an essay question about FIFO and LIFO, it's the same FIFO and LIFO. The calculations are the same. The essay question might ask you to explain a little bit the difference between FIFO, or how the difference between FIFO and LIFO impacts profit or inventory valuation, ending balance, something like that. But it's not different. Those essay questions can usually, a lot or most of that question can be broken down into individual MCQs. I'll give you one more example. Process costing. Okay, we've got our process costing. We're calculating equivalent units produced. We're calculating what is the cost for the finished unit. What's the cost in ending WIP? Well, if that's an MCQ, there's an MCQ about equivalent units produced of materials or conversion costs or all those different steps within the process costing process. That can be an MCQ. If it's an essay question, well, they just ask all of those steps about one particular piece of information, one situation. Now, the other thing that makes the essay questions a little bit more difficult is the answer's not there. You can't guess, okay? With an MCQ, there's 4 choices. You have a 25% chance of getting it correct. If you get in an essay question, something about calculate basic earnings per share and diluted earnings per share, well, you have to write a number. You can't guess. You don't have a 25% chance of A, B, C, or D. So the essay questions are more challenging, isn't quite the right word, because if you're prepared to pass your exam, you don't need to guess. You're going to be able to calculate the basic earnings per share. You're going to be able to calculate earnings per share. And so you're just going to write the number down. You're not going to need to guess. So if you're prepared for your exam, the fact that you can't guess on an essay question isn't going to be an issue for you, because you weren't going to be planning to guess anyway, because you have all of those answers correct. Now, let's talk a little bit here about these steps. I just said that if we have a process costing question on the essay exam, we have to do all those steps based on one set of information, and we get one number at the end. A very good thing about the essays, which has an advantage over the MCQs, is for the essays, even if you get the final answer wrong, you get points. Okay, so with these types of questions where there's multiple steps, that also works very well for how it is that it gets graded. You get points for every step along the way that you do correctly. And if you make a mistake in the first step, the way they grade the question is they say, okay, let's assume that the answer in the first step was correct. If that had been correct, did they do the second step correctly? Did they do the third step correctly? Did they do the fourth step correctly? You get partial credit. It's not all or nothing. The MCQ, if you do a process costing MCQ question, you make one little mistake somewhere along the way, you don't get that question correct, you get no points. But on the essay, you're going to get all of those points for what you did correctly. Another way of looking at it is, let's pretend on the essay question, they ask you to prepare a balance sheet. And we know that the balance sheet is supposed to balance, but let's say you make your balance sheet and it doesn't balance. There's a mistake in it. One number is wrong. Well, if there were 10 numbers in that balance sheet and you got one of them incorrect, you got 9 out of the 10 points that were available for that essay. Your balance sheet is wrong. It doesn't balance, but you were able to get 9 of the 10 points for that essay because you did 9 of the 10 things correct. So those essays give advantage as well because you get points for what it is that you get correct. So let's come back now to this question of what topics may be covered. I made a point at the beginning of saying that we're talking about the same syllabus for MCQs and essays. And so if there's an MCQ, if it's a topic that might have an MCQ, it's also possible that that topic might have an essay. But let's be honest, let's be realistic. Some topics are going to be a little bit more conducive, a little bit more in line with what they're looking for in an essay question. And so as you're going through the exam studying, as you're going through the materials, you're reading the textbook, watching the videos, doing the questions, you'll begin to get a sense of what topics are what I would kind of call bigger topics, and what topics would therefore become a little more easily able to create an essay from. Okay? Capital budgeting, ratio analysis, segregation of duties. Okay. And unfortunately, it's a lot of the topics of the exam. It's a lot of the topics of the exam that can show up as kind of that big, broad question that covers a big area. So here's the question that you really came to. How to prepare for the essays? How is it that you should go about preparing to answer the essay questions? And I've been doing this for 20 some years. And what I've determined is the way you prepare for the essays is to prepare for the exam itself. And what I just talked about, I hope demonstrates that. Is you go through ratio analysis and you prepare for the MCQs and you answer all those individual MCQs about how to calculate the current ratio and the quick ratio and this ratio and that ratio and all that. You're also preparing for the essays because the essay is going to ask the quick ratio, the current ratio, the PE ratio, all those same ratios. If there are MCQs about capital budgeting, you're also preparing for those essays about capital budgeting because the content's the same. You're doing the same thing in capital budgeting in an MCQ and an essay. So I don't think, I don't think that you need to worry about preparing specifically for the essays. You need to prepare to pass the exam. You need to prepare to answer the MCQs. You need to prepare to answer the essays, and all of the content is the same. So as you're doing those MCQs, you're also preparing for the essays. As you're doing the essays, you're also preparing for the MCQs. So how do you prepare for the essays? You read the book, you watch the videos, you do the MCQs, you do the essays that have been released. You want to do all of the essays that the IMA has released because that helps give you some perspective as to how it is that they ask the questions. One essay question may have 6 or 7 different individual questions that you have to answer. So do them. See those types of questions, those, what does this mean? Why do we care? What do we do with this information? But you're preparing for the exam. you're not preparing specifically for the essays. You're not preparing specifically for the MCQs. If you know overhead allocation, if you know the different costing methods, if you know the difference between variable and absorption costing, you're ready for any question. It could be an MCQ, it could be an essay. You're ready for it. So the only thing really that you need to do to prepare specifically for the essays is to do the essays. Do the essays that the IMA has released. We've got them in our software. You go through them. We've got them in the different study units as you're going through, some saved at the end as a review. You just want to go through to make certain you understand how it is that the IMA is asking questions. So you're ready for it. So you already kind of have an expectation. You're not going to be surprised by the way the format is set up, how many questions you need to answer, and things like that. So let's spend a few minutes here at the end before we get to questions, talking about how do you write your essays on the exam. Okay, how is it that you're actually going to write the answer on your exam? You have a limited amount of time, and so you need to keep in mind that you're not trying to write a book. You're trying to answer the question. This isn't an opportunity to write everything you know about every topic on the exam. You want to make certain that your answers stay focused to what it is that they ask. If they ask you to list 3 things, you need to list 3 things. And if they ask you to list 3 things, I would recommend you put a 1, a 2, a 3 to demonstrate that you have the 3 things. If they say list and define, then you need to list it and you need to define it. If they say calculate, you need to calculate. If they say explain, you need to explain. You're not trying to write 5 paragraphs about something. A lot of the written answers can be done in bullet points, can be done in kind of a list format. There may be some where you need to write a short paragraph or something like that. You get points for everything you do correctly. Don't leave a question blank, even if you don't know how to do all of it. Write down and show your work for what you do know how to do. You get points for everything you write that's correct. If you don't write it, you can't get points for it. Show your work. If you made a mistake, a basic math mistake, and you show your work, you can get partial credit. But if you just write down an answer with no supporting work and it's wrong, you didn't get any points for it. One of the ways that I look at this is I say, you want the person who's grading your exam to be your friend. You want the person to like you. And so what this means is have a little structure to your answer. If it says list, make a list, 1, 2, 3, 4. Try to put spaces between things so it's easy for the person to find what it is that you've done, how it is and where it is that you've answered the question. This person who's grading your essay is grading a lot of essays. You want them to want to give you the points that you've earned. A question we get a lot from candidates is, what about spelling and punctuation and grammar and things like that? Well, the good news is you're not graded on grammar as long as they're able to understand what it is you were trying to say. So if you aren't certain what the past perfect tense of the verb is and you get it wrong, that's okay. You're not going to lose points because you spelled something incorrectly. You're not going to lose points because your grammar was a little bit off. If you're able to communicate what it is that you wanted to communicate as your answer, that's what's going to be graded, and not the spelling, not the punctuation, not the grammar. But your spelling and punctuation and grammar need to be close enough that they know what it is that you were trying to answer your question. Again, you get partial points. If you don't get it all correct, you can get partial points. And so you don't leave anything blank. Make certain that you show your work, support the answers that you've come up with, the answers that you're submitting, with all those steps along the way. If we take process costing again as an example, there's a lot of calculations in process costing to come up with what's that final cost per unit. Well, show your work, because even if your cost per unit is wrong, you might get 7 of the 8 points that are available for that question, because you've done 7 of the 8 steps correct, and there's just one little mistake you made somewhere along the line. Now, I want to make certain that we have time for questions, but I said at the beginning, my goal was to help you feel more comfortable about the essays, because I know that this is an area that's a lot of stress and a lot of concern for a lot of people is having that all done and prepared for. If you're preparing properly for the exam, you are preparing for the essays. It's not a different syllabus for the essays. It's not different content. The way you do FIFO and LIFO for the MCQs is the same way you do FIFO and LIFO on the essays. The format of the question is going to be a little bit different. You don't have a choice. You don't have an A, B, C, or D to guess from. You have to come up with the answer yourself. But the content's exactly the same. What you need to know is exactly the same. Slightly different way of asking it. And like I said, the essay questions go kind of that one step further. Why does this matter? Why is this important? What do we do with this information? Why do we care that we have this information? Those don't show up a lot in the MCQs, but with the essays, this is your chance to take those numbers, those calculations, and demonstrate that you know what those calculations mean. Anybody can calculate a ratio if they have a textbook open. But what the essays are doing is making certain you know not only how to calculate that ratio, but what that ratio means, what we need to do with that ratio once we've calculated. So the way I look at it is, if you've gone through and prepared for your exam, if you've prepared for your exam properly and doing what it is that we tell you to do, and you've done everything, you're ready. You're ready for the MCQs, you're ready for the essays. Now, here's something too that I'll share, and I don't have any statistics to prove this, okay? And I don't know if statistics are available for this, but my guess would be that if we take a person's score on the MCQs, what percentage of the MCQs they get correct, and we compare that to what percentage they get on the essays, what percentage of the points on the essays they get correct, I would predict that the percentage that people get correct on the MCQs and the essays is fairly close. And the MCQs are 75% of your exam score, and the essays are 25%. If you get 50% of the MCQs correct, okay, theoretically and mathematically, you could get 100% of the essays correct and still pass the exam. But here's my question. If you only got 50% of the MCQs correct, what makes you think you're going to get 100% of the essays correct? If you only got 50% of the questions correct when there was all you had to do was recognize the correct answer, there's no chance you're going to get 100% of the essays correct where you have to create the answer. And so I know sometimes people write, well, if I get this percentage on the MCQs, what percentage do I need to get correct on the essays? I'm not sure that math works, because I think the percentage you get correct on the MCQs is probably going to be pretty close to the percentage you get correct out of the essays. And so I'll kind of end this by saying, how do you prepare for the essays? The same way you prepare for the exam. Know the content, understand the content, be able to apply that knowledge to a new situation, and just be ready to share that knowledge that you have. Use that knowledge. Everything that's calculated on an MCQ is calculated exactly the same way on the essay. It's the same syllabus. It's the same content. And so are the essays important? Absolutely. It's 25% of your exam score. Is there something you need to do specifically to prepare for the essays? Yes, you need to do the past questions. So somebody asked, are the essays that are included in our software enough? Yes. Yeah, all the questions that the IMA has released that are still current to the syllabus are in our software. And that's more than enough. You just want to get a sense of how the questions have been asked in the past, the different requirements that they have and how it is that there's some calculations that you have to do, and then there's some interpretation to that. All of that is how it is that you prepare for the exams. Okay, prepare for the MCQs, prepare for the essays. It'll all be the same. I have another question here in the chat, and if you have questions, you can go ahead and send them by chat. I'll be happy to answer them here with the time that we have remaining. There's questions that say identify benefits and limitations of, and the question is how many benefits and limitations should be written. I would try to have at least 2 of each, maybe 3 of each. It depends a little bit on kind of how many components there are to an essay. If there's 8 components to an essay and one of them is to list benefits and limitations, you're probably looking at 2 or 3. If there's, kind of one big essay that's set up and a lot of information, and then, one of the main requirements is what are the benefits or limitations of the situation, you may need to have more than that. But I'd be looking to have 2 or 3 whenever there's a list. If it doesn't give you a specific number, at least 2, preferably 3. And it may be that there's more benefits than limitations. You don't have to have exactly the same number of each, but it's just a matter of making certain you've got a couple for each of those. Somebody's asked the question, in the essays, there's a suggested answer that's provided. No, you don't need to write everything that's in the suggested answer. You don't need to. You can have different answers than the suggested answer. That's just what the IMA has released as the suggested answer. So as long as you cover the same points, as long as you have the same ideas, the same kind of process, that's going to be fine. Do you need to give full numerical calculations in the essays? No, but yes. You don't have to give the full numerical calculation, but if you want partial credit, you need it. Okay, if it asks what is basic earnings per share and what is diluted earnings per share, and you write basic earnings per share is this and diluted earnings per share, and they're correct, that's fine. But if those numbers are wrong and you don't have any supporting calculation, you get 0 points from that. If you have, here's how I calculated basic earnings per share, here's how I calculated diluted earnings per share, they can go back and see that, oh, this was just a calculator mistake. They pushed the wrong number on the calculator. You may get 9 out of the 10 possible points for that. So you don't have to show your work, but I strongly, strongly encourage you to do it, because that's how you're going to get 9 out of 10, 8 out of 10 points if your final answer isn't the correct answer. There's a question about what percentage you need. When you take the MCQs, you need 50% of the MCQs correct in order to get the essays. If you get less than 50%, you don't even move on to the essays and your exam is over at the end of the MCQs. What percentage of the MCQs and what percentage of the essays do you need? 75% of each, 100% of each. Obviously, the essays are 75% of the exam, and so you can do, there's a math process to that. I don't encourage getting into this game of if it's 75% and I got, because it's a scaled score. And so there isn't a direct mathematical correlation like we want there to be. I tell people, if you plan on getting 75% of the MCQs right and 75% of the essays right, you'll pass. Preferably more than that, little margin of error there, little safety margin. But if you, again, I don't think that scores between the MCQs and the essays are very different for people. I understand occasionally that will happen because we all have topics we like more than others, and we have topics we like less than others. So it's possible that on your exam, the essay question is the topic you hate the most. You know, you've prepared every topic but one. You just don't like process costing, whatever topic it is you don't like. And one of the two essays is about process costing. That's unfortunate for you. And in that case, your essay score might be a little bit lower than your MCQ score, but there's not going to be a big one. So I don't encourage this, you know, if I get this percentage on the MCQs, what percentage? Do your best on both of them. Somebody's asked the questions, are HOCK questions harder than the questions in the exam? That's what you felt. We get comments every direction. Some people go and say the questions in our software were harder than on their exam. Some people say our questions were easier than on the exam. I don't know what to say. I wish I had a specific answer to that. Some of this comes down to the individual exam that you get. In every topic, there are difficult questions. You know, that exception to the exception, there's the most difficult question. On the exam, you're going to get a couple of difficult questions. Which topics they're from, we don't know. Is the weight of the MCQs and the essays based on the difficulty of the exam? No. Everybody is 75% MCQs, 25% essays. Your score within the MCQs, your scaled score and how they generate that scaled score will be influenced by the difficulty of your exam. But it's still 75% to the essay or to the MCQs and 25% to the essays. Question, which topic is more probable to come in the essays in part 2? I don't know. And this becomes risk management. If you decide that you're going to study for one topic as the essay, there's a good chance that topic's not going to be an essay. Now, looking at past questions that they've released, capital budgeting has been asked about quite a bit. Ratios have been asked about a fair amount. But even within part 2, if you just take section B, there's a lot of topics within section B. And so even within section B, there can be questions about working capital. There can be an essay question about the cost of capital. There can be essay question about international finance and things, exchange rates and things connected to that. And so there's a lot of good topics in part 2 that can become essay questions. And so I really don't know what to tell you in terms of what it is that would be the topics that are more likely to be tested. And so the question, you need to prepare for all the topics in both parts when it comes to the essays? Yes. But like I said at the beginning, I don't think you don't need to prepare differently for the essays and the MCQs. Just going through and you read the textbook, you watch the videos, you do the practice questions, that is preparing for the MCQs and for the essays because the ratios are the same. Whether it's asked as an MCQ or an essay, that it's calculated the same way. And so to me, you're preparing for the exam. On the exam, there are MCQs and there are essays. But if you're preparing properly and understanding the concepts and being able to explain the concepts, it doesn't matter whether the question is an MCQ or an essay, because you know how to make the calculation. You know what that calculation means. You know what we're going to do with that information that we just calculated. And so that preparation is for the exam. And that's preparing you for both the MCQs and the essays. Somebody said they're good with the MCQs, but I always get stuck with the essays. To some extent, that may be a mental or a psychological kind of stuck. You want them to be harder. But what I would recommend in this case is you take those essays and there's a number of requirements. Okay, there's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, depending on the question. And really what you need to do is you just need to break that down and do it step by step. What is the one thing that I need to do for this first requirement? Calculate the ratios. Okay, well, here's the ratios, here's the formulas, here's the information, here I've calculated. Then you go on to the next one, and then you go on to the next one. And don't look at it as a big essay question. Break it down into the smaller individual requirements, the smaller individual steps, and keep in mind that you get points for each little part that you write that's correct. It isn't all or nothing. You get points for each step along the way that you've done correctly. And so you want to make certain you show those work and show that step, show those steps that you've done, so you get that partial credit. So even if your earnings per share number is incorrect, you still get 5 out of the 6 points that were available there because you've done most of it correctly. There was just one thing that wasn't done correctly. We're getting near the end of the time here. I'd like to thank you for attending this. I know we've got some more webinars upcoming. I've got a few more that we've already got scheduled. I know some of you have registered for those as well. We're also running a number of short courses if you're studying for CMA, where we go for a couple hours into specific topics, and you can sign up for just the specific topic that you're looking for. If you've purchased our CMA complete materials, those short courses are free of charge. They're just absolutely free. You get a coupon code for that, and you can attend those short courses for free, just as a kind of that deep dive into these topics that are a little bit more challenging for most candidates. And so I invite you to sign up for those short courses if you haven't already, to look at those. They're on our website on the events page. We've got some more webinars upcoming. If there's a topic that we don't have scheduled that you'd like me to talk about in terms of exam preparation, let us know. I'll be happy to put some webinars out there that are things that people are looking for. Again, thank you very, very much for your time. I hope this was helpful. Those of you that still have the essays in front of you, I hope you feel a little bit more comfortable about them, a little bit more calm as you think about them in terms of preparing for them and what you need to do to prepare for them and all of that. And so I wish you great success on your exams, great success in your career going forward. I look forward to seeing you in the other webinars that we do, the other short courses that we have. And as always, if there's any questions, if there's anything we can help you with as you're studying, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're here to help you all along the way. So thank you very much for your attendance. As I said, I hope you're a little bit more comfortable with essays, a little bit more calm in terms of how you're going to prepare for them. Have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to seeing you, interacting with you in other webinars, other events that we have. Thank you very much, everyone.